and welcome for the last day of refresher course on internal audit. And today's our learned speakers here, Rishabh Jain is there to guide us about the his subject is performance of internal audit assignment, IA standard 2300-2340 and internal audit evidence SIA 320. Correct, Rishabh? Yeah. So without wasting more time, I want to introduce CA Rishabh Jain. CA Rishabh Jain is an FCA and LLB. He is the founder, CEO, and principal partner of Marks Network, a network registered under new guideline of ICAI. And Rishabh has intensive experience in the field of internal audit and financial and commercial due diligence. He has also been a part of internal audit and Ind AS committee of WRC of ICAI and is currently serving as co-opted member of valuation committee of WRC of ICAI. He strongly believes in CA in practice to branch out into new age practice avenue and expand their horizon with networking and alliance as prescribed by ICAI and grow the profession into uncharted territory. With this brief introduction, I want to welcome CA Rishabh Jain for our refresher course on internal audit. Welcome, Rishabh.
Thank you.
Yeah. So how you will like to take the question session in between or after end of your presentation?
We'll take it at the end. I think at the end we can solve everything together.
Okay, fine. So the participant, if you want to ask anything, you can put into the question answer window. So we can take this question after this presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Rishabh. That you can start.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for the very kind words and kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you for coming today, which is generally a very peak filing season. So everyone here today, I'm very inclined to believe that everybody really wants to learn about internal audit. Otherwise, they would have been filing ITRs at this time. So welcome, everyone. Just a couple of disclaimers that the session today is a bit of theory. We've tried to take live case laws, MCQs along with it so that you may find it a bit interesting. But in general, you may be aware that auditing standards and standards in general are theoretical. So that is that. And people at WRC, if at all I lose my voice at some point in time, please feel free to interrupt. Tell me that you lost my voice at any moment, and we can take that ahead.
Yes. Right. We will take care of that.
Welcome, participants. So we'll start. Now, I'm sure you did in the last week, you've done the 2200 series of IIAs last week about planning, right? The important part to note is that all these standards, although they are sequentially put, you and I know that in reality, all of these are performed and executed along with each other. So if you talk about the planning phase of 2200, the performance standards that we'll talk about today, 2300, the communicating one of 2400 that you'll have in the next sessions, all this go hand in hand. All of these are important to know. So an idea and understanding of all the sections even before you plan your internal audit is extremely crucial from the end of having this standards complied with to the book of it. So let us move ahead. These are the areas that we are going to cover today, right? 2300 is performing the engagement, 2310 is identifying the information, 2320 is analysis and evaluation, 2330 is documentation, 2340 is engagement supervision, and SIA 320 is audit evidence. Now, as I was saying about disclaimers, a lot of these are continuations from your 2200. So at many places you will continuously find, audit planning and everything coming, because when you're performing the audit, it continues to take the baton from the planning stage. So consider this as a relay where you've taken the baton from the planning stage. Now you're into the performing stage, and we have to sit down, we have to analyze as to how we can read about these standards and take that ahead. Now, a very basic thing, I'm pretty sure all the participants are aware over here, but two types. One is standards on internal auditing that is prescribed with the Indian Internal Audit Standards Board of the ICAI. The second one is prescribed by the Institute of Internal Auditors, which was established in 1941. So we'll be learning about both sets today. So we'll be learning about 2300, 2310, 2320, 2330, 2340, and we'll be learning about SIA 320 today. Now, let us take a deep dive right into it, right? Performing the engagement. The first thing that we all think about when we think about performing the engagement is starting the audit right away. As I mentioned before, the most important thing when we talk about performing the engagement is you have to go back and see what we have put down in the planning phase. What are the areas? What is the nature? What is the extent that we have planned to cover about the areas that we're looking to perform now? That is very important for us to start how and when do we go ahead with performing. Now, let us look first at what the standard says. Internal auditors must identify, analyze, evaluate, and document sufficient information to achieve the engagement's objective. Now, this is very simply understood is that while we are performing, we have to first identify. Once we've identified, we have to analyze and we have to evaluate, and then document the sufficient information. If I have to break this out in the terms of standards to you, identifying information is 2310, analyzing and evaluating is 2320, documenting is 2330. So what 2300 is basically saying, it is summarizing what we have to do in the next three standards. And by that means, we have to first identify the information, then analyze and evaluate the information that we've got, and then document so as to achieve whatever is the engagement's objectives. Now, what are the considerations for implementation? The 2300 series of standards encompasses performing tests outlined in the planning phase and evaluating and documenting the results. As we've said twice or thrice already, see what we've planned, perform that, evaluate, and document that. As internal auditors reflect on the information needed to accomplish the engagement objectives, they should consider the expectations of the board and the senior management, right? So why this is important is because our end goal, our deliverables, should meet what has been set out by the audit committee or by the board or by the senior management, and what is their objective from this whole assignment. As we are all aware, internal audit is some assignment that keeps on evolving. It is not like stat audit where we have a set number of things that we have to continuously do every year, check whether there are dues, there are no dues, check whether it is in compliance with Schedule 3, with Ind AS, etc. In internal audit, it is a very dynamic situation where the objectives keep on changing. So we have to first, while performing, understand whether we have gotten the objectives in line with what the audit committee or what the board or the senior management is expecting from us, right? The engagement information should be collected and documented in such a way that a prudent, informed person could repeat the engagement and achieve similar outcomes. Now, when you look at the language of IIA, this is one line that keeps on repeating across a lot of standards, is that the audit should be done in a way where any prudent, informed person, any person who has basic knowledge, if he repeats whatever we have done, he will come to similar outcomes. He will come to similar observations at the end. And this is the crux. It's basically how we plan, how we perform, and then how we document. All of this should be in such a lucid format that anyone who is looking at it can easily repeat whatever you have done, and he can come out with the similar objectives. This is very similar to what we have in our normal standards on accounting and for statutory audits, is where we talk about that our documentation should be in such a way that if any other CA goes through the documents, he will easily understand what we have carried out. So this IIA and other IIAs keep repeating this format so that it should be in such a simplified and lucid format that it can be easily taken up by anyone else, and they can easily come to the same outcome as we have come at, right? Internal auditors must base conclusions and engagement results on appropriate analysis and evaluations. Analysis and evaluations we'll see in much more detail in the standard 2320. As evaluations are completed, the results may be recorded in a column added to the risk and control matrix, the RCM, which is the go-to tool for an internal audit. And this is typically documented as a work paper. Now, any chief audit executive, they establish a common approach to work paper documentation in the internal audit activity policies and procedures manual. There is an internal audit manual that you start with. Once you start with the manual, there is policies, procedures, what needs to be done, how queries needs to be addressed, how queries needs to be escalated, what is the resolution, is the observation resolved, not resolved, is a follow-up required. All of that is derived from the internal audit manual that any organization has. So we have to see and we have to ensure that our work paper documentation is completely in line with the same. Before coming on to the considerations for demonstrating conformance, what we need to understand, what I'll do in today's session is that I'll take one live example. Say, for example, let us pick out the chemical industry. Let us assume that for the sake of these standard discussions, you have been appointed as an internal auditor for a company that is into the manufacturing, trading of highly volatile chemicals. And let us then look at how we take that example and how we go ahead. So if you're talking about, say, performing the engagement, if you're talking about IIA 2300, the first thing that we need to do, as always, is go back into the previous internal audit reports, see if there are any open observations, any follow-up observations, see whether the recommendations that we have made, if the management has carried out those recommendations, if they have ensured and they have seen any outputs coming out of those. That is where we generally start our internal audits. The second is obviously into the planning phase, where we are planning, we're targeting the areas that we want, we're deciding on what is the extent of the areas that we want to cover. All of these things, say for the chemical industry that we're looking at, we perform a complete audit plan, audit program. We have a complete questionnaire with us. We highlight areas that we want to go in depth of. In most internal audit assignment these days, the management themselves says that for the first quarter they want a coverage of certain areas, for the second they want a certain other set of areas, ensuring that our audit plan is also in line of the same. So if we're talking about chemical industry, let us assume that this time they have asked us to check upon the whole purchase part of it and the whole logistics part of it, because in chemical industries, you and I are aware that logistics plays a very important role. So let us assume that for this conversation, we are looking into the purchase and the logistics part of it. So when we're looking at purchase and logistic part of it, while performing the audit, as I told you, first we have to see previous audit reports, see the plan, and then now we have to go ahead and we have to execute the assignment. How we'll execute the assignment and how we'll use this example going ahead, we'll take it up when we're doing the other standards that are coming after this. Now, considerations for demonstrating conformance. What this basically means is basically how do you demonstrate that you have complied with the standards. Any standard generally in the performance category, the 2300 series, their compliance is generally visible only by the way of your work papers and discussions and other items that will keep on coming and I'll keep on saying. So in the same spirit, if you look at considerations for demonstrating conformance for IIA 2300, it may be evidence in the engagement work papers that describes the actions, analysis and evaluations performed during an engagement, as well as the logic supporting conclusions, opinion and or advice. As you may be aware, work papers normally include a description of any computer aided audit technologies or softwares that are used during the engagement. Additionally, final engagement communications typically demonstrate conformance. So, whichever is your final audit engagement report, the suggestions, all of those will show how much and in how much of a depth have we performed the audit. A very simple MCQ, right? So in the chat box, people can use the chat box and see, just guess what, or just try to make an educated guess. What do they think the answer to this is? So an objective for an audit of a medical research corporation is to evaluate management's control to ensure that timely reports are submitted to sponsors of contracted research projects. In planning the audit to achieve this objective, the auditor should begin by A, reviewing policies and procedures, B, interviewing a group of research managers, C, observing report preparation in a number of laboratories, and D, sending a questionnaire to a sample of research sponsors. What do you think is the most appropriate answer? I would like you to put that down in the chat box.
All are requested to put their answer in chat, question answer session. They can't put in chat box, I think.
Okay, in the
So
question and answer
yeah.
box, if you can just put in your answer, then we'll try to make this a bit interactive. Okay, I think for some reason I am unable to see any of this. I have Kairas saying that they think the most appropriate one is D. Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll see what the answer is. The most appropriate answer is A. That is, first of all, reviewing the policies and procedures. Now
Most of
we'll.
the persons are writing D and C.
Okay, I think yeah, it came a bit late to me, all these answers. See, as we are aware, there is no typically wrong answer, right? This is not a KBC where we'll have only one. We'll have to first see which is the most appropriate answer. So where do you begin? This is not about what will you do. The question is, where will you begin? So the first thing that we begin generally in with is reviewing policies and procedures. C and D are things that generally come upon, as a later procedure. The first thing for you to understand will be reviewing policies and procedures. All right. I hope that is clear. So now we go on to the next standard. This standard probably in the whole series carries the most amount of importance. It is IIA 2310, which is basically identifying the information. Now, I want everyone to understand the key word here is identifying information. We are not talking about gathering of information, right? Because in an internal audit, you and I are aware that there is an ocean of information that you can explore. You can put 3 times the amount of team, 10 times the amount of time, and still you will find that you're not able to cover the length and breadth of the information that is there. So very key characteristic for any internal auditor is to identify the information, and identifying needs skill. So in this standard, what IIA has tried to do is guide us into a way where we can understand how we can identify the relevant information and then use that in our analysis and then arrive at a conclusion. So this standard, all participants, I'll like you to put a bit of importance and focus here, because this is probably the key standard for this series. Now, what is the interpretation? Now, as I told you before, one common terms in IA is generally come up to is, that any prudent person will arrive at the same conclusion. The second thing that is very standardized across IIA standards is that A, there should be sufficient information. B, there should be reliable information. C, there should be relevant information. And D, the information should be useful. So as I told you, in any internal audit, the information can be leaps and bounds, right? So what we have to look at whether the information we have achieved, is that sufficient, right? And will any prudent informed person come at the same conclusion as we are coming? Second, and most important is any information reliable, right? How have you come across such information? Is it just by the management, representation? Is it a third party? Is it some information that we have found out ourselves? Is it something that is system generated? So the reliability of the information is also very important. Relevant information. Now, in an audit, you may have experienced, management will give you a data dump of almost everything. The skill for any internal auditor here is, how do you understand what is the relevant part of the information? What is relevant is basically what supports our observations, supports our recommendations, and it is at the end of the day consistent with what is the objective you've set out for the engagement. See, if we're doing a listed entity and we're internal audit for say Q2, so we have to then look at the relevant information for the objectives that we are set out to achieve in Q2, not in any previous or later standards. And last and obviously is that the information should be useful. Basically, it should not be frivolous. In our standards on auditing and stat audit, we use something as material information. So here we are talking about useful information. Is that whatever is the information should be useful. So I want everyone to read this again, because we'll come across this into a standard 2330 as well, is that information should be relevant, reliable, sufficient, and useful. These are four key words that we need to understand and that we need to imbibe to get the most out of this standard. Now, introduction. When we're talking about the introduction of this, and you're aware that we begin gathering information. Whatever is our, generally there is an IRL that is prepared, the initial requisition list. We shoot that out. We start gathering information. That is how any assignment starts. Then we have a review of the engagement objectives, the engagement work, and then we have to sit and identify, as I said before, if the information is sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful. Then the work program prescribes the procedures that internal auditors use to perform the engagement. After that, we have to ensure that there is established and effective channel of communication with, say, third parties, with the management, with different heads of the organization. We also, in any organization, we generally have either heads that we communicate with. We fall back to organizational policies. We fall back in internal audit a lot to SOPs. So is what we're doing in compliance with the SOPs? Is it in compliance with whatever is legally allowed by the company, or after having a discussion with the legal counsel? And in any internal audit, and especially when we're talking about IIA 2310, it is very important for us to have an open, clear, and concise communication in between us, that is the internal auditors, and the organizational personnel. The organizational personnel can be, the board, the audit committee. This is, this is probably of a lot of importance. Now, considerations for implementation. Basically, IIA has now listed down what they believe is required for implementing these standards. What are the considerations that any internal auditor should keep in mind for ensuring that this standard is being complied with? Before reading what is on the slide, we have very many simple audit procedures and manual procedures that we take care, right? We have physical evidence where we go, we check, we collect documents, and there is obviously physical evidence of third parties. It can be a client, it can be an outside organization, it can be, say, communications from various statutory departments. There can be testimonial evidence. By testimonial evidence, we mean if we have inquired or interviewed with anyone, we will sit down and we will see whether such information, such inquiry is useful, because there is only a limited amount of things that any document can speak and that any SOP can speak. We have to go ahead and we have to speak with the people that are involved, right? Now, say for example, I'll take an example here and continue. In the logistics, of the chemical industry that we've picked up, right? So say hypothetically, we've had a meeting with the head of logistics over there. So how do we start? The first is we look at whatever their SOPs are. We look at whether all SOPs were followed during the period or not. There is a 99% chance you will find many deviations, many diversions from SOPs. Now, what is most important, and because logistics is a very practical aspect, is for you to sit down and you have to understand why those diversions have come in place, whether you think such reasons are enough, whether you think they are, observations that are justifiable. So hypothetically, I spoke to the logistics head, and I noticed that at some point in time, there were, lower quotations available for them. But however, from different ports, however, they've gone up and selected not the least one, but probably the second from the bottom or third from the bottom. So when you sit down with your, when you sit down with the logistics head, you will realize that, there may be a lot of issues. For example, say from the Kandla port, you will find that the warehousing at Kandla port was not available. Or if it was a highly volatile substance, the containers and the specialized equipment that we need, or at times the cold storage that you need, that was not available. So, rate cannot be the only determinant, and you cannot be an internal auditor where you have just seen that lease rate was not prescribed and you put that down in the internal audit report and submit it to the audit committee or the board of directors. You will have to justifiably speak with the person in charge, in this case, the head of logistics. You will have to ask them the reasons. And then you have to take into account, you have to evaluate and analyze whether you believe those reasons are valid, justified, or in this case, you believe that those reasons are probably not as justifiable. So this practical example I'm saying because I want you to relate with the theory that is on your screen. So we'll go ahead with the theory now. Considerations for implementation that IIA wants you to know is that during engagement planning, internal auditors gather information about the audit client and document the information in work papers. The level of analysis and detail applied during the planning phase varies by internal audit engagement and activity. According to Standard 2310, the reliability of the audit information depends on the use of appropriate engagement techniques. Some techniques take longer or require more resources than others because they enable higher level of assurance. So we have to strike a balance as to what we believe is an assurance that is reasonable, as well as some technique that will not take a very long period of time. Some manual audit procedures I've already said before. The sufficiency and reliability of information increases when the information is current, corroborated, and or obtained directly by an internal auditor or from an independent third party. As an auditor, we are aware that we rely more on third party confirmations, probably on confirmations that are then attested or stamped or agreed upon by a third party as well. And this will demonstrate, whether the controls inside the organization are operating effectively. In addition to the considerations for implementation, it is also important for internal auditors to critically assess of all the engagement information as a whole. Conclusions and advice are based on the evidence that is persuasive rather than absolute. So when we are looking at the information, we cannot cherry pick or nitpick small points. We have to look at the information as a whole, and the conclusions and advice that are based on the evidence, it should be persuasive rather than absolute. As the engagement resources are limited, it is important for internal auditors to identify and prioritize the most relevant and useful information. As we've touched the base before, that internal audit is a vast ocean. So we have to ensure, we have to plan that we have then gone ahead and we have relied only on information that we believe is relevant, and we have not gone about and relied probably onto everything. A much detailed part about this will also come into documentation, is whether when the information that you identified, how we document that. So standard 2310 and standard 2330 go a lot hand in hand, right? Now, what are the considerations for demonstrating conformance? What do we mean by considerations for demonstrating conformance? As I've said before, is how do you show it to a third party that you have complied with these standards? Now, as I told you, that conformance with standard 2310 may be evidenced in the engagement work program and the supporting engagement work papers, which may be stored electronically or in paper format. And obviously, to confirm if the information that was provided was useful to the organization, you can carry out surveys, right? So whatever is your observations, whatever is your suggestions that you have sent to the company, you can see whether that has actually been helpful to the personnel or the line managers or the area managers that were there. And that can tell you if whatever you're doing, was it was the whole activity or the engagement worth the output. In addition, the chief audit executive also monitors the disposition of the engagement results communicated to the management, which may provide evidence of the usefulness of the information communicated. When you are submitting your internal audit report, when there is a discussion happening in the audit committee meeting on it, that can be your first-hand experience as to realize whether the information that you have communicated with the management, was it useful, were the audit procedures carried out properly, and were the engagement objectives being met over here. We'll go back to another MCQ. At the end of almost all standards, we've kept a couple of MCQs so that you can get a couple of minutes of break from theory. The question is, which of the following would provide the most reliable information on the risk associated with an auditable activity? A, event scenarios with regression analysis. B, past audit findings and instances of management failures. C, consequences and economic predictability of loss. D, management assessment and corroboration by the internal audit activity. Right? I will read this again. Is which of the following would provide the most reliable information? So सबसे ज़्यादा reliable information किसमें होगी? A, when we are looking at event scenarios with a regression analysis. B, if we are talking about past audit findings and instances of management failures. C, we are talking about consequences and economic predictability of loss. And D, we are talking about management assessment and corroboration. Corroboration means getting it confirmed by the internal audit activity. So I want you all to take a minute and put in what you think is the answer. There is no right or wrong. There is no judging. This is something that you have enrolled for as a matter to learn. So please, I want everyone to use the question and answer and go ahead and answer what they feel. Okay, Rajesh ji is seeing D. I'm waiting for other participants to revert. Okay, on my screen, I have only one answer so far. Come on, everyone. We have quite some participants today. I'd like, there is no right or wrong. You know, you can look at yourself and then you can analyze and we can discuss why we believe what we put in was right or wrong. Vaishali Mane has said D. Dhanaji Shinde ji has said D. Okay, so it turns out D is quite a popular answer amongst everyone.
I think A. In my opinion, it should be A.
Event scenarios with regression analysis?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Fine. Participants will take 30-40 seconds more. Okay, we'll go up to what we believe is the answer. And the answer is D, which is management assessment and corroboration by the internal audit activity. So whatever was management's assessment, we'll look at the question again. Which all of the following would provide the most reliable information on the risk associated, right? Why the answer is D is because it has been corroborated by the internal audit activity. And for that reason, it is reliable for the risk that was associated. Now we'll go on to something that as chartered accountants we love to do, is basically analyze and evaluate. We love to play with data. We love to work with a lot of audit procedures, a lot of other things, right? So I'm sure when you did standard 2240, they were talking about how to make a work program, details about work program. In this standard, we're talking about in 2300s, we're talking about actual execution. But in addition to that, in 2320, we're talking about now you have first in 2300 you've talked about how you can perform the engagement. In 2310, you've talked about how you're identifying the information, right? Whatever is the information, if that information is relevant or not. Now 2320 is an important standard where they're talking about analyzing this set of information, evaluating this set of information, and that is something that is extremely important. In taking ahead our logistics example, for example, we spoke about speaking with the logistics head. We spoke about getting information to him as to why there was some diversion from SOP, why the minimum rates were not taken in, and all of those things that happened. So at the end of it, when we're putting it down in our internal audit report as an observation, the first thing we need to be sure is whether our analysis and evaluation has been complete. Do you think that whatever the person who is the head of logistics, whatever he has said, if that is correct? And if not, if you think that that is not correct, do you think you should ask someone else? Do you think you should ask probably an industry expert, or probably reach out to a couple of more vendors, right? If the company has tied up with 2 or 3 people in logistics, do you think you should run an independent inquiry if the logistics head is saying that something at the Kandla port is not conducive for their products? If you believe what he has said along with the documentations that he's given, good enough. But if you believe that the information that you've gathered, that is not sufficient, or if you believe that you cannot rely on it completely, as an internal auditor, what is your duty in this context is to analyze and evaluate, right? You've collected the information, you use the analysis, you process the information. If you think that after processing the information it is correct, it goes ahead. If you think that the information is not sufficient, then you have to perform additional audit procedures. What is the additional audit procedure in this case? Is you may inquire, say, hypothetically, the company had multiple vendors they had taken a quotation from, right? You inquire with the second vendor, or you inquire with the vendor probably who was the cheapest, or you inquire in multiple areas, and you then get it corroborated as to why you believe that whatever was the explanation was correct, or whatever that explanation given was probably not tenable. And then we have to sufficiently elevate it to the board or the audit committee, or to whoever as an internal auditor we are reporting to. So why I'm saying that before we start the standard, because we have to analyze and evaluate. Only collecting information and parroting it to or copy pasting and sending it to the audit committee is not why we are there as internal auditors. Internal audit function, as we are aware, is one of the most important value addition functions that an organization has. At every given quarter, you have to look at new avenues where the valuation that we are looking, the value that we are looking to add will keep on changing. So that is why analyzing and evaluating the information is of supreme importance for us. Now, what is the standard saying? The standard says that internal auditors must base conclusions and engagement results on appropriate analysis and evaluations. It sounds very simple when we read it, but obviously in theory, you and I are aware that we have to spend way too much of time just getting this correct. So how do we base our conclusions and engagement results on appropriate analysis and evaluation is what this standard will try to touch base upon, right? Standard 2320, it requires internal auditors to analyze and evaluate the information obtained during the engagement before drawing conclusions. When planning the engagement and creating the work program. See, again, we have gone back to the planning phase. When planning the engagement and creating the work program, internal auditors may have completed several engagement steps and generated important information, including a RCM and an evaluation of the adequacy of the control design. So when we are drawing the the engagement program or the work program, there are quite many things that we are aware about. And what 2320 says is that information collected even at the planning phase is something that is very important. The work program often links to work papers that document the work completed, information produced, and resulting decisions. So as we are auditors and we are aware, we have an initial requisition list or a work program as to what we want to cover, how much we want to cover. Once the audit is over, within 60 days, we go ahead and we have a complete audit working, the work papers that we prepare, and that work papers directly link with whatever we have mentioned in the work program, and it also directly links to our internal audit report that is there. Now, in this standard, what are the considerations for implementation? Before probably taking that up and getting into this much theory, we'll continue with our live example of we're talking about the logistics part of a Fortune 500 chemical company. So when we're talking about the logistics part of it, in 2320 there is an approach which we call as a root cause analysis. What does root cause analysis mean? Is that we have to start asking questions until we receive a final answer, the root cause, right? So if we asked the logistics person, he's given us an access to all the contracts with different sort of legislators that we have, different logistics operators that we have. He's given us the contract, he's given us the documentation. What we have to do is we have to then sit with those contracts and we have to go into root cause as to why we think it was perfect or not perfect. Now, say when we're talking about port, when we're talking about storage, what we also have to see, for example, in an audit I had conducted, was that we had to see the holding cost. The holding cost is basically the cost of storage. Now, as I said, we are in an industry of chemicals which is highly volatile, and that cost is very important. So, at times it is not just the cost of transporting your chemicals from port A to port B, or from port to customer, or port to export. What is also very important is that we have to see what is the cost of storage. In India, there are some ports where the cost of storage is very high because such facilities are limited. In India, there are many ports where you will find other costs to be much lower. So we have to, as we were saying before, that we have to look at it everything as a whole. So in this case also, we cannot simply put up one observation saying that probably a more expensive logistical operator was selected. We don't have to see that only. What we have to also see is what was the cost of storage. What we also have to see is if who was asking to deliver in what time. If you send something by courier, it will take 2 to 3 days outside of India, or maybe more. You send something by speed post, it is done the next day. You have an option of sending something by say DHL, which has a 1-day delivery option, right? All of these options carry different costs. The one that is taking a longer time will obviously be cheaper than the one that is delivering right away today. But also what we have to analyze and put into perspective is the need. If, for example, I had to ship an assignment just today, and there was no other way that it could have been delayed due to other factors or due to client commitments, and if I've taken up a higher or a more expensive means of logistics, that is also justified. So that is why, as an internal auditor, what I want to ask all of our participants today is we have to think on a very a very whole level. We cannot think on a micro level. We have to think on a macro level. So logistics will go hand into hand with purchase. Purchase will go hand into hand with stocks and cost of storage and other things. So all decisions by management, they have some basis or the other. As an internal auditor, it is our duty to look at a complete picture. So that was the example. Now, what is the considerations for implementation? We'll see on the slide. First part, the transitioning from planning to performing an engagement. It may not be completely distinct because both phases involve some degree of analyzing and evaluating audit information, right? When we are planning, we are using some information to plan. When we are performing, we are collating much more information, right? So they are not mutually exclusive. They are not distinct. They go hand in hand. Performing the engagement generally involves conducting tests prescribed in the work program to gather evidence about the operating effectiveness of key controls. So when we are performing, right, we conduct tests, we conduct walkthroughs, and we probably conduct interviews. In that, we gather evidence about how effectively the controls of the organization are operating, right? So if we have had interviews with line managers, we get to know different things. If we have interviews with head of departments, there is a separate information that you get. If you have an interview or a discussion with the management, there is a separate set of information that you will get. So when we are analyzing and evaluating, obviously what a person at the board or the audit committee thinks to be material is not material for a line manager. So we have to look at all levels as to whatever are the observations, whatever is the information that we have analyzed, given that level for a line manager, for whatever his observations are, we have to check at the line manager's level whether whatever was the control that was set in by the company, is it effective or is it not effective, right? We cannot put the expectations that an audit committee member has and compare it with what is the control on the line manager level. We have to look at it separately in this instance, because what may be material to one may not be material to another, right? Going on, based on the risk and control matrix and work program, internal auditors are likely to have a list of specific procedures and tests to be conducted. As we said, we more or less have an RCM drawn. We have a list of specific procedures. We have a list of tests that we want to conduct, probably have a walkthrough to a department. The extent of testing depends on whether test results have produced sufficient audit evidence on which internal auditors can base their conclusions or advice. So if you have analyzed contracts, and if you think that the contracts are in complete compliance, you will not test further. When you have analyzed contracts, you have seen that in 8 instances such contracts were followed, but in 2 instances contracts were not followed. You will probably go ahead and you will conduct further audit procedures and further tests to analyze what were the reasons for two occurrences where it was not followed, right? And lastly, if the testing procedures prescribed in the work program do not provide sufficient information to make conclusions and recommendations, internal auditors may need to adjust the testing plan and perform some additional testing. Now, this is also very important. I have set out with an understanding of the industry, right? Say, for example, in COVID, when we were conducting internal audits in COVID, we had to first and foremost realize that in 2020, whatever we had as a past experience for other companies had completely changed, because the manners in which companies were operating was very different. People were operating out of their villages. People were operating where, half of many even big companies did not have a sophisticated communication channel. A lot of these people were working on WhatsApp at that point in time, because that was what was important, right? Companies that were always in the physical format of working, when you ask them to work remotely during a nationwide lockdown, right? So the expectations change. So there is a good chance that whatever I thought would be enough, testing procedure, I may have realized that that will not be enough. I may have realized, and in that way, I have to adjust my testing plan. I have to perform additional testing. During 2020, in Q1 and Q2, in many companies, we had a disclaimer mentioned that due to the special working environment, the assurance that we are providing or the degree or extent of audits that we have been able to do is dynamic. It is different from our previous experiences. And at times, the company is not mature enough on the technology front to have everything documented. And that has gone out as an observation that in case such lockdowns come again, which it came again in 2021, for example, whether the company had a business continuity plan, whether the company had a sophisticated format in which they can follow up with the information, in which they can see whether whatever they had planned was happening properly or their SOPs were carried out. So these are special instances, and as an internal auditor, we have to be open to such occurrences that keep on happening from time to time. Now, talking about analysis and evaluation. So when we're talking about analysis, what are we actually talking about is, as you know, testing approaches often include a combination of manual audit procedures and computer-assisted audit techniques. So we have to look at analyzing those with a separate lens. Internal auditors may test a complete population or a representative sample of information. If they choose to select a sample, they are responsible for applying methods to ensure that the sample selected represents the whole population. As an auditor, we are aware wherever we are going into a sampling, we have to ensure that to the extent possible, the sample is representative of the whole population that we can determine, right? Use of CADs may enable the analysis of an entire population of information rather than just a sample. So as internal auditors, wherever you have an option to use computer assisted audit techniques, you will go ahead and use them so as to ensure that you can cover a higher amount of population rather than just choosing a sample. Analytical procedures are used to compare information against expectations based on independent sources. Examples of analytical procedures include ratio analysis, reasonableness test, prior period comparisons, etc. Very short example I'll give you is, if you're aware now, in Schedule 3 also, there is now a new requirement for all companies for ratio analysis, right? So first, what was expected only as from stat auditors was to carry out analytical procedures. Now, in general, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs wants all readers of financial statements to be aware. So there is now a proper ratio analysis that is there. When we also as auditors, we do an analytical procedure after the information is, with us, we carry all sorts of analysis, not just ratio analysis. We probably compare it to prior periods. We compare it to if we think how the market is performing. For example, the whole textile industry in COVID for 2020 and 2021 was shut, right? Malls were not open, manufacturing was shut, everything and everywhere there were issues. Many of them pivoted into manufacturing of PPEs. So, do you think that pivot was reasonable? Do you think that the company is incurring a lot of costs? In terms of experience, I'll tell you honestly, COVID has been probably a very good experience from a personal learning curve, because we have gotten to see so many companies adapting so many things, becoming so agile towards changes. We had a lot of textile companies who overnight had to just abandon the line of production, get into manufacturing of PPEs, get their certifications in line, train their staff. So all of those things, we have to compare. So if you want to compare, say a turnover of a company that was manufacturing shirts, and the next time they started manufacturing PPEs, you will not be able to compare, because that is a completely different line, and those times were different. Unexplainable results may indicate a need for additional follow-up and may suggest presence of a significant problem that should be communicated to the senior management and the board. Naturally, when we have a lot of data and we say that something is not justifiable at all, you have to escalate it, and you have to escalate it to the senior management and the board or the audit committee, whichever is in charge. Now, evaluations. At each step in the engagement process, there is professional experience and professional skepticism to evaluate whether evidence is sufficient or not. Professional skepticism, something that as chartered accountants we use extensively, is what we have to use even in case of internal audits and in case of compliance with 2320 standard, is that we have to see whether whatever is the evidence, is it sufficient, is it appropriate for us to arrive at a conclusion and or arrive at a recommendation. If it is not, we have to go ahead and we have to make further inquiries. Although complex issues may require more rigorous analysis, in certain circumstances, a root cause analysis may be as simple as asking a series of why questions in an attempt to identify the root cause of a variance. Now, this is what I was talking about as a root cause before. So let's see the example. You're saying a worker fell. Why did the worker fall? Because there was oil on the floor. Why was there oil on the floor? Because a part of it was leaking. Why was a part of it leaking? Because the part keeps failing. Why does the part keep failing? Because the quality standards for suppliers are insufficient. So this is what we mean in a very simpler terms with a root cause analysis. Is what we have to do is we have to keep asking the question till we come to a concrete or the last solution. So why is there a continuous issue here? There is a continuous issue because we realize that probably the quality standards for suppliers are insufficient. You have to have higher quality standards, and you have to make probably a cost analysis of going for probably a bit of superior materials, but in exchange of that, trying to reduce workers from following down. Lastly, when the time frame or skill levels needed to complete the root cause analysis exceed that which is available within the internal audit activity, the chief audit executive may recommend management address the underlying issue and conduct further work to identify the root cause. Right? As we know, as we discussed, that internal audit is an ocean. So if you realize that probably you are not an expert, if you are trying to audit a company that is into technology, at one point in time you and I will have a limitation of knowledge. That may be a problem, or there may be a problem of the resources and the time that it is taking. In such a case, as an auditor, as an internal auditor, we have to recommend the management that of our limited analysis, this or XYZ was the observation, and that you should conduct and you should address this issue and have a further analysis so that you can go ahead and you can identify the root cause. All right, we're back to the part where at the end of the standard, we take a minute and we write down what we believe is the answer to this question. So I want everyone to read this first, and then I'll read it along with you. All right. Which one statement about sampling is true? A, for a given sample size, a simple random sample always produces the most representative sample. B, for very large populations, the absolute size of the sample has more impact on the precision of its results than does its relative size to the population. C, a larger sample is always more representative of the underlying population than a smaller sample. And D, the limitations of an incomplete sample frame can almost always be overcome by careful sampling techniques. So I want everyone to answer. We have 1 minute to take this. Is what we believe is to be the answer. Do you think it is A, B, C, or D? I want everyone to participate as much as possible. So, there is no right or wrong when we are learning. This will probably be a learning experience for you as well. Okay, in chat, we have an answer of B. We have an answer of D. Okay, again, we have answers of D that is coming in. Answer of B. Okay, so B and D in this case has been very famous about which of the statements is true. Now we go to a second MCQ before we go ahead and we discuss the answer for this one. Is an important difference between a statistical and a judgmental sample is that with a statistical sample, A, more accurate results are obtained. B, population estimates with measurable reliability can be made. C, a smaller sample can be used. And D, no judgment is required because everything is computed according to a formula. I want you to take 10 seconds, read this again, and then in the chat box, write down as to what you think is an answer for this one. An important difference between a statistical sample and a judgmental sample is that with a statistical sample, what happens when you're looking at a statistical sample? A, more accurate results are obtained. B, population estimates with measurable reliability can be made. C, a smaller sample can be used. D, no judgment is required because everything is computed according to a formula. Okay, we have all series of answers today. For this one, there is somebody who believes it is D, that is no judgment is required because everything is computed according to a formula. There is A, there is B again, and there is D as well. All right, and we've gotten a couple of B's over here, that population estimates with measurable reliability can be made. All right, thank you so much for participating. I'll go on and we'll see what the answers to these both are. So when we're talking about the first one, it is said that a larger sample is always more representative of the underlying population than a smaller sample. Going back to the question, whenever we are, say for example, you have chosen a list of 10 contracts or 10 parties amongst 100 contracts or 100 parties, right? There is a chance that that 10 can accurately represent your population. Now, if that was not 10, if it was 90, do you believe that will be more appropriate representation of the population or less? So always a bigger set of data will be more representative of the entire population. If I pick 10 contracts when there are 100, and if I pick 99 when there are 100, what do you believe will be a true representation of the population? So in all cases, there is always that a larger sample is more representative of the entire population. Now, I did not see any answers of C in the first one, but I saw a lot of B in the second answer, and I'm very happy to see that. Is that population estimates with measurable reliability can be made. What do you mean by a judgmental sample? Is that you have picked up, very whatever you think are more important parties just from a judgment, and you have formed a sample out of it. What is a statistical sample? Is basically you've bifurcated it into multiple areas as to the number of contracts, as to the volume of the contract, carried out a Pareto analysis, etc., etc. So what is the difference in between these? Is that in a statistical sample, population estimates can be made with a measurable reliability. We are not saying that there is an absolute reliability, but we can measure the reliability because we are using statistics. So if I have picked out 10 sales contracts, and if they represent 90% of my sales, I have a measurable reliability in this avenue that is there. Okay. Thank you everyone for going on to this. Now we'll go on to, I hope that 2320 is clear for everyone over here. Now we'll quickly go on to the next standard, which is documenting information, which is 2330. Documenting information is basically half of what we already know, half of what we are already doing, but we are still going ahead and we are discussing this standard in a quick and brief manner so that we are aware about what the standard says. Right? What is the statement? Internal auditors must document sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful information to support the engagement results and conclusion. These 4 words you've discussed before: sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful. Right? Engagement work papers are used to document the information generated throughout the engagement process, including planning, testing, analyzing, and evaluating data, and formulating engagement results and conclusions. The use of standardized work paper formats improves the efficiency and consistency of the engagement process. Effective work papers contain information that is sufficient and relevant to the engagement objectives, observations, conclusions, and recommendations, which makes the information useful in helping the organization meet its goal. So because we are talking about documentation, we are talking extensively about work papers now. We have planned the audit, we have planned the execution, we have collected and identified the information. You have now, in the last standard, analyzed and evaluated the information. After all that is done, what we have to do is we have to prepare our work papers, and that is what is majorly covered when we are talking about documenting information. And it is very important to have work paper consistency. We cannot have different set of work papers in one audit, different set in another. We cannot have a different set of work papers that are there in 2 subsequent quarters. There should be consistency. Generally, any chief audit executive or any organization or a firm, as I told you before, they have an internal audit manual. And in the manual, they also have guidelines and procedures on how should an auditor who has executed the audit complete the work papers. So there is a systematic manner in which everything should be completed, and anything that is standardized, right? If you are sending your articles on an audit, and if you send them just like that, they probably will not know what to do. But if you have sent them with a standardized checklist, a proper audit program, when they are reaching the audit, they are much more aware about what needs to be done. And that is what they mean, that any standardized work paper format, it improves the efficiency and consistency of the engagement process. Also, what happens in this is that there is a good amount of responsibility that can be assigned. If I have written down that one function or one area, say sales, for example, or manufacturing, for example, or stock taking, for example, I have put down different names of different of my teammates of different CAs working under me. What will happen is they will be more responsible towards completing that in a much more effective manner. Now we've talked a lot about work papers. Now, what are the elements of the work paper that we are talking about? This is something that we have all prepared, probably not in a very formalized manner, but we have all spoken or seen about this. So what is the work paper that we're talking about? It should obviously be indexed. There should be a proper title, heading, which identifies the area of process under review. On everything, there should be a date or period of the engagement. It can be a quarter, it can be 6 years, 6 months, it can be a year. What was the scope of work that was performed? What all did you include in your scope, right? The statement of purpose and for obtaining and analyzing the data. Why have you obtained a set of data? If I had to ask for contracts of my different legal people, I'll tell you what happened in one of the cases that we were handling is that there were contracts with customers, right? But we realized that the contracts were 5 years old, and all contracts had a mention that this contract is in existence only for the next 3 years and it will not be renewed. So if you are seeing contracts, right, why were you seeing it? What was the analyzing data? And in this, and in their SOPs also, they had written that contracts have to be renewed every 3 years. Now, there are different customers you sign at different periods. So there should be a robust system inside an organization where they can follow up or they can tabulate that this contract was made on this date it is expiring. And on the date of expiry, there should be a renewal that should happen and not 2 years later. So this had also happened with one of the companies that we were working on. Now, seeing what we have more in the elements of work paper is the sources of data covered in the work paper, description of population evaluated, including sample size, method of selection, methodology used to analyze data, details of tests conducted and analysis performed. What was the test? Have you conducted a root cause analysis? Did you conduct a walkthrough? Did you ask people? Did you corroborate evidence from a third source? All of these will come under details of tests conducted and analysis performed. Conclusions, including cross-referencing to work paper on audit observations, right? This is what we have spoken before, is that when we are writing conclusions, we have to also reference them to the audit papers. If I'm writing that XYZ was a conclusion that was obtained, I will write that these were the audit papers or these are the work papers that can demonstrate. Do we have a proposed follow-up engagement work to be performed? When I am talking about people who had contracts that were not renewed, I will say that in the next quarter itself, there has to be a follow-up that such contracts, whichever were lapsed, have were the internal audits, who auditors who were reviewing the work, who was in charge of all of that. So all of those things we have to check. Now, talking again about conformance, demonstrating conformance. So how do you see whether you have documented the information? Very obviously, you have to go back to your work papers. So the evidence that the engagement information is sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful may be demonstrated in management's effective implementation of recommended actions. If I have said, and if I have found that whatever audit I had conducted, and in that I believe that it was very important for me to point out these sales contracts, I will come to know automatically when I'm doing the next audit where the management is renewed all the contracts. So that is a direct evidence that whatever was the engagement information, it was sufficient. Similarly, we can have post-engagement surveys of individuals who received the engagement information. They may also evidence conformance. You can have a survey, you can ask line people if whatever were suggestions, do you think they were helpful? When we are talking about SOPs and we are talking about suggesting changes in SOPs, we generally take a post-engagement survey where we ask people who are carrying out such functions or SOPs to ask them if those SOPs or the changes have helped them. This gives us a direct conformance. Okay, we go on to the next MCQ. We'll be a bit quick with this one. So just 1 minute is what we have. An adequately documented working paper should A, be concise but complete. B, contain examples of all forms and procedures used by the engagement client. C, not contain copies of engagement client records. D, follow a unique form and arrangement. So according to you, an adequately documented working paper, what should they have? Should it be concise but complete? Should it contain all forms and procedures? Should it not contain copies of engagement client records, or should it follow a unique form and arrangement? Think of it as the most suitable answer. There is no wrong answer. You have to think of it as the most suitable answer. That if you want your audit, if you want your working paper, how would you most likely want it to be? We have Rajesh ji who has said A, We have Pallavi who said D, Danaji who has said B. So we go ahead and we see that the answer to this is A. Rajesh ji is correct over here, that the answer is A, that even though the working paper can be concise, but it has to be complete. Now, as I said, this is the most suitable option. So the most suitable is in your working paper, you cannot have an audit file to print all the sales documents, copies of all the contracts, right? You can have a summary and you can reference it, or you can prepare a summary. So that's why it should be concise, but it should be complete at the same time. Now, in the series of IIAs, we come on to the last IIA, and after this, we have just one SIA to do. The last IIA is upon engagement supervision. Now, logically, we have planned the engagement, performed the engagement, identified information, analyzed, evaluated information. Now, we will documented the information. After all of this, what is it that remains? What is it that you have to see is basically a supervision part of it. As an auditor, as a partner, supervision is a very, very important aspect. Continuous discussion with your staff is extremely important. Ensuring that the quality of assignment, ensuring that the objectives of assignment are met, all of these are very important. What is the statement? The statement of the IIA is that engagements must be properly supervised to ensure objectives are achieved, quality is assured, and staff is developed. So the three things that I mentioned before: first, whatever were the objectives, they are achieved; second, the quality of the assignment is achieved and assured, and that the staff is developed. We face a lot of problems when we're dealing with our teams and staff, is that we realize that at times they are not able to develop so far. So we have to continuously train them, set out easier means, manners, handhold them a bit. So these are important aspects for any supervision to happen. Extent of supervision required will depend on the proficiency and experience of internal auditors and complexity of the engagement. If your team is experienced, your level of oversight will be very less. If your team is not experienced, you will have to handhold them more. If the assignment is very complex, you will have to handhold them more. The chief audit executive has overall responsibility for supervising the engagement, whether performed by or for the internal audit activity, but may designate appropriately experienced members of the internal audit activity to perform the review. Now we'll run through this quickly because quite a lot of it is, I think, very a part of our common working and common sense. Is that the chief audit executive usually develops internal audit policies and procedures to address how engagements are planned, performed, and supervised. So as I said, there is an internal audit manual. We talk about the planning, performance, supervision in that. The policy and procedures may specify software programs or templates that internal auditors should use to establish consistent formats for work programs and work papers. Now we have a lot of audit softwares that have come out that a lot of our firms are using, which ensures that there is a completeness of information, and it removes the reliability for one person to supervise by automating this whole procedure. So whether such software programs or such templates, Excel templates that you have prepared, are they sufficient or they need revision every year? In our office, for example, every year we carry out a revision of whatever was our standard procedure, whatever was the software that we were using, and we try and increase or improve that to the extent possible. Similarly, policies and procedures may address opportunities for staff development, such as policy requiring post-engagement meetings between the internal auditor who performed the engagement and the chief audit executive or designated engagement supervisor. So at times, generally in our firm, this is not at times, but in our firm, we always have detailed audit meetings even after the assignment is done, and we take a part of all those observations and we keep in our file for the next team, whoever is the auditors from our office, if there is any change, to carry that out. Now, consideration for implementation, very simple, that as a supervisor or as an engagement supervision, it starts from the moment you have signed the engagement to the moment that you have signed and issued the audit report and conducted any follow-up procedure. So it begins with planning and it continues throughout. And typically, the engagement supervisor manages ongoing communication with internal auditors assigned to perform the engagement and with the management of the area or process under review. So there is a continuous communication in internal audit. You are aware is that continuously people are in touch with each other, whether their observations are in line, whether their suggestions are in line, whether whatever they have said is relevant for the board, for the audit committee to take it up. The supervisor evaluates whether the information testing are sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful. Again, we're talking about sufficiency, reliability, relevance, and usefulness to achieve engagement objectives. Therefore, as discussed before, the chief audit executive usually develops policies and procedures designed to minimize the risk that internal auditors will make or take actions that are inconsistent with the professional judgment, right? So we try and make everything as standardized and as trackable and traceable as possible, so that whoever is the internal auditor on the job, they are much more standardized, much more efficient. Now, again, how do you confirm whether standard 2340 has been applied? You see whether 2340 has been applied by obviously going back to your engagement work papers, whatever were made in the beginning, whatever were made in the later stages, and how the supervisor has done. If whatever his observations are, as we write, the staff performs, we say that the observations are proper, they go back to the client. If it is not proper, if that whole thing is being captured in the work papers, then we realize that engagement supervision is happening properly. And obviously, internal auditors may also have the opportunity to provide feedback about the engagement supervisor through peer review mechanisms such as surveys. So as I said, we in our office, at the end of every assignment, we have a discussion and we have a survey, an anonymous survey, where people tell us about what they have learned from the assignment, what they feel could have been done better, and what they feel should be incorporated in the future audits. So these also show that the engagement supervision has been carried out properly. All right, we've got time for one MCQ in this. Due to the bit of a, not really shortage, but due to my time coming to a closure, we'll take just 1 minute for this. Supervision of an internal audit engagement should include A, appraising each internal auditor's performance on at least an annual basis. B, assigning staff members to the particular engagement. C, determining the scope of the engagement. And D, determining that engagement working papers adequately support the engagement observations. Everyone, we have 30 seconds. Will be more than happy to see you participate in the chat box and in the Q&A box. Supervision of an internal audit engagement should include A, appraising each internal auditor's performance on an annual basis. B, assigning staff members to the particular engagement. C, determining scope of the engagement. And D, determining the engagement working papers adequately support the engagement observations. So we have C as an answer in the chat box. We have D as an answer by Rajesh ji. All right, we go to see what we believe the answer is. The answer is obviously D. And by D, we're talking about that an internal audit engagement, it should always include that your engagement working papers will adequately support your observations. Now we come on to the standard, which is SIA 320. SIA 320 is talking about internal audit evidence. Now, in any internal audit, gathering evidence is a key part of the process. This standard probably has some overlap with what we have discussed so far about gathering information, analyzing information, documenting information, finding sufficient and appropriate evidence, about reliable sources. So this is a standard by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. So there may be some overlap, but we will quickly discuss that and we will then see what this standard is talking about. Internal audit evidence refers to all the information used by the internal auditor in arriving at the conclusions on which the auditor's opinion is based. Naturally, all the information that was used by us is known as internal audit evidence. It includes both information collected from underlying entity records and processes, as well as information from performance of various audit activities and testing procedures. So when we're talking about internal audit evidence, it is not just the data that you've taken from the client or the SOPs that you've taken from them. It also includes from the information that they have given, what was the audit activities and testings that you have carried out. That is also a part of internal audit evidence. Gathering appropriate and reliable audit evidence is a critical part of the internal audit process. This standard will explain certain key requirements in process of collection, retention, and subsequent review of internal audit evidence. This standard applies to all internal audit assignments. So we're talking about all internal audit assignments have to comply with SIA 320. However, the manner in which the evidence is to be gathered from the performance of audit activities and testing are not subject matter of this standard. So we are not talking about how, we are talking about having all internal audit evidence. How we are gathering is not what is subject matter of this standard. It is covered elsewhere. The objective of SIA 320: confirm the nature, timing, and sufficiency of audit procedures. What was the nature of it? What was the timing, and whether the audit procedures were sufficient? Does it help in supervision and review of the internal audit work? Whether the work performed is in conformance with applicable pronouncements of ICAI. The overall objective of gathering appropriate and reliable evidence is to allow the internal auditor to form an opinion on the outcome of the audit procedures completed. So as is common sense, that the ultimate aim of the internal audit evidence is for us to form an opinion on the outcome of the procedures, audit procedures that are there, and to show that we have enough evidence to come or to make a certain opinion and or recommendation. Now, methods of obtaining internal audit evidence, internal audit evidence. It can be inspection, it can be observation, it can be inquiries and confirmation, it can be analytical review, which was the analytical procedures we were discussing before, right? What does this standard have in terms of requirements? The requirements of this standard is that it should obviously have sufficient and appropriate audit evidence, which can form basis of audit findings and allow reliable conclusion. We have discussed this before, but this is key. It sounds very simple, but at the end of the day, if there is some conclusion that we have come at, if there is some suggestion that we are giving, in that we have to see that whatever is the internal audit evidence that we have obtained, is it sufficient? Is it appropriate? We have discussed this before, that evidence shall be obtained from reliable sources, and there should be consistency between various evidences that are collected. So if you're talking about a reliable source, we know who is the most reliable person in an organization, who is the line head, who is the department head, whether that information can be corroborated or confirmed from anyone else, or whether performing our testing procedures, do we also arrive at the same conclusion? So that is why the source of the internal audit evidence is important, and our procedures also. Audit evidence collected shall be recorded, and the internal audit function shall maintain a written process explaining the manner in which audit evidence is to be gathered, reviewed, and documented. This goes down in our manual as well, is that we have to have a procedure in which, a written procedure in which we explain the manner in which, how you gather an evidence, how you review, and how you document it. What should be the nature of evidence? We're talking about internal audit evidence, but what should be the nature of it? It should be collected either from underlying companies' books, records, systems, and processes, or through the performance of audit activities and testing procedures. Normally, the internal audit evidence is persuasive on its own, and a number of evidential matters in aggregate help make it conclusive in nature, right? If management has made certain representations and that is backed by the books of accounts, that is persuasive. When we complete and when we perform additional procedures and we also arrive at the same conclusion, using all of that together, the internal audit evidence makes it then conclusive for us to go ahead and make a reliable conclusion, right? Reliability and consistency of evidence, what we are talking about, that the reliability will depend on the source, whether it is external, whether it is external, whether it is thorough, and what is the timing of the audit procedures that were conducted. All audit evidences shall be recorded in such a manner that it can be reproduced if in digital form, and reviewed independently of the internal auditor, right? So as we discussed in the IIA before, that our work papers and our audit evidences should be in such a manner that any prudent person who is undergoing the same steps will arrive at similar conclusions. We're talking about the same, that there should be reliability and consistency of evidence, and it should be reviewed independently. Documentation, we have discussed in IIA that there should be a written policy and process on audit evidence as a part of the internal audit manual. Details of the evidence collected, relevance to the audit findings and opinions being formed, they should be cross-referenced to the internal audit program wherever we feel that is appropriate. All right, we come at the last MCQ, is which source of audit evidence would provide the least value in flowcharting an organization's purchasing process? So which source, from which source when you're taking that audit evidence, will it give you the least value? A, an interview with the purchasing supervisor. B, a review of sample of purchase orders which were completed during the last month. C, a review of purchasing policies and procedures manual. Or D, a walkthrough of the process with a member of the purchasing staff. Now, this is the last MCQ for today, so I need people, we take 1 minute over here, and I need as many people as I can to answer this. Okay, Dhanaji says the answer is C, a review of purchasing policies and procedures manual. All right, I'm waiting for everyone else's answers to pour in. We have another answer that says B, a review of sample of purchase orders which were completed during the last month. We have one more answer that says B. Rajesh Ji also says that the answer is B. Okay. B seems to be quite a popular option. And the answer correctly by almost every participant is B, that only a review of sample of purchase orders which were completed during the last month, they will not provide a lot of value in an organization's purchasing process. All right, I have exceeded my time. So it's 4:30 and we have time for the next speaker to come in. So I would leave this open here. If people have any queries whatsoever, they can reach out either on WhatsApp or they can reach out on my email, and I'll be more than happy to help them out. I hope that this session today has been useful for you in understanding what is not commonly discussed. Internal auditing standards are very new and fresh. Like we have standards on auditing in finance CA, people do not know a lot about internal auditing standards so far. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for having us. And I think I'll then hand over to the people at WRC who will take this ahead from me.
Thank you, Rishabh. If any question or query, I don't think you have left any question unsolved or there is a scope of query, because your presentation was so elaborated, and you have taken practical examples and what practical scenario, what happened in COVID and how to do the internal audit and all these things. And people like I personally feel very that it session was very much delightful, and information was there. So on behalf of WRC, I request all to carry with a good round of applause to give a hearty vote of thanks to CA Rishabh Jain. And our next speaker, CA Abhishek Mittal, is there. Actually, see the comments are coming, very good session, fantastic session. So and your topic was as you said that it's a theoretical topic, but you made the topic is very much interactive and interesting with your MCQs. In CA fine, we come to know about we remember our CA days, the MCQs were there and we have to solve. So it is quite interactive and interesting things were there. So thank you Rishabh to join and to share your experience and your knowledge with us. And now our second session of CA Abhishek Mittal ji. Abhishek Mittal ji is there.
जी मैडम।
Yeah.
मैडम आपको अभिषेक सर का प्रोफाइल भेजा है इसमें।
Okay. Okay. Yeah. See the just a second.
अभिषेक सर वो आपको पीपीटी आपका शेयर करेंगे सर।
Yeah, sure. Can you see my screen?
So Rishabh, can you share your PPT with us?
Yes.
I'm sharing it. Oh, you're asking Rishabh.
Yeah, please. I want to welcome CA Abhishek Mittal for our second session, and I am very much delighted to formally introduce Abhishek ji. Abhishek Mittal is a chartered accountant and a partner with KC Mehta and Company LLP. He co-leads the management audit practice and is a member of CA Institute. CA Abhishek has over 17 years of experience in managing and conducting risk-based internal audits, process review, enterprise risk assessment, IFC framework design, standard operating procedures, preparation for large multinationals, listed and private limited companies. He also has considerable international experience, whereby he has conducted internal audit in USA, Europe, Asia Pacific, and Africa. CA Abhishek works across a vast array of industry with expertise in pharma, healthcare, IT, FMCG, and manufacturing domains. He helped in setting up the risk assurance practice for one of the big four in Gujarat from ground zero. He was also instrumental in developing and implementing foreign corrupt practice at FCPA framework across the globe for a Fortune 500 company. So with this brief introduction, I want to welcome Abhishek ji. So Abhishek, first of all, I want to know what is Foreign Corrupt Practice Act. I heard this first time.
So this is an FCPA Act which has been passed by the Parliament or the House in US. So if you look at something, there's a Corruption Act in India. It is called Prevention of Corruption.
Money laundering.
Yeah. So this FCPA is there since quite a bit of time in US, and this basically takes care of any bribery which happens from a private or a listed company. So if you're caught, giving a bribe to a foreign official. Now, official they define as anyone in the seat of power or a government official. Then you could be the jailed. So if let's say there is an MNC in US whose subsidiary or whose associate is there, let's say in for the better reason in Pakistan, So, and if someone is caught bribing there, a foreign official, so the directors of the US company can be actually jailed.
Okay.
So the department.
Yes. So it includes government bodies also?
Yes, it does. That is the biggest thing. And so it's not as easy that they can just put people in jail. So basically the act says that the Department of Justice in US, if something is found like this, is first going to ask you, what is the process or what is the entire control you have in your organization that people are aware, that bribery is not permitted. Now, if someone wants to bribe, no one can hold them back, right? If I want to go and bribe, my organization cannot hold my hand. But has the organization imparted enough knowledge and if enough sessions to me to tell me why bribery is wrong and what could it lead? So if I can justify that I have adequate anti-FCPA processes in my system, then I'm safe. So it does not say don't bribe. The FCPA says, but please put up an entire framework so that people are aware about these bribery provisions, anti-bribery provisions.
It should be implemented in India also, I think.
Yes. So, but it's just that applicability changes because I don't know how they'll make it applicable to government officials here, but let's see.
Correct, correct. So I don't want to waste your more time, and please, sir, you can start your session.
So, I hope everyone can see my screen. So great. Thank you so much, ma'am, for inviting me to present on these two important topics, which is SI 330, the internal audit documentation, and SI 350, which is review and supervision of internal audit. Now, I believe internal audit documentation probably is one of the most important aspects of the entire internal audit cycle, which probably starts from finalizing the scope, engagement letter, audit plan, my working papers, to the issue of the final report. This entire thing is nothing but document. Every step you take after your internal audit scope is approved by the audit committee or the senior management in case of an unlisted company, that is documentation. So, and it becomes very important in today's world where we have so many agencies who could, come and ask us, let's say if there's a fraud in XYZ, tomorrow the stat auditors or their forensic auditors might ask you, okay, why weren't you able to catch this? And that is where your internal audit documentation helps you that, I have done the procedures as required. Though catching fraud is not one of my areas, but I have looked at all the controls and we didn't find any issue there. But you have to demonstrate that. You can't just say, I looked at it. No. If there's no documentation, no audit is done. That's my mantra. So if you can't prove it to me on paper, that means the audit didn't happen. So it is very important. And similarly, review and supervision of internal audit is equally important because the team at ground zero might be doing 10 things. Now, one is you keep them on, line, as in that it has to happen within time. And review is important because you need to give your inputs as seniors that what are the other things you need to look at. All of us know internal audit is the depth is unlimited. So someone needs to keep the team and everyone on focus on the objective. That's where review and supervision of internal audit comes in. Naturally, we'll discuss in detail in coming slides. So today I'm going to speak, as I said, on the internal audit documentation. I'll show you some practical illustration and working papers. Now, naturally, these working papers could differ from organization to organization, but the basic premises is that please document your audit. You can document it any way you like, but it has to follow a proper chronology. It has to have a proper linkage. And the most important thing which links it to SI 350 is that if I'm reviewing the working paper, I should have minimal questions. So my thing is, if I'm able to review a working paper without having a single question, that means those working papers are perfect. Yes, naturally, there'll be some questions, but the idea is to make those working papers as sacrosanct as possible. And again, we'll talk about review and supervision, and I will show you some practical illustrations of how the review can be done or the supervision can be done. And finally, happy to take questions. I would love this to be a interactive session. So if anyone wants to send out questions in between, happy to answer. Otherwise, I can answer it in the end. So I will not spend much time on this slide because this is a refresher course which started a couple of weeks back. So I'm assuming everyone knows what the standards of internal auditing are. But quickly, they're set out to provide guidance. All standards are set out to provide guidance. They provide a framework. They provide a structure on how the internal audit should be carried out. Why is the need for it? The need is because I need to be able to have a uniform method of doing internal audit. The uniformity is that when everyone follows the standards, naturally my processes and my practices become standard. So that's the need. And what is the scope? It applies to different audits depending upon the respective scope. Any departures should adequately be disclosed. It's like a limitation that if you've not covered something in your as part of your SI, that should be disclosed. But the entire idea of standards of internal audit is to provide a framework to help in uniformity. And third is to cover every kind of internal audit we carry out. Coming to internal audit documentation. What is the meaning? What is the objective? What is the content? So the meaning is as simple. Write down whatever you do, document whatever you do. Now, these days you would have seen, right, on LinkedIn, people saying, hey, I cleared my CA. Hey, I cleared my CA. Hey, I got an all India rank. But what do they do the first thing? They first upload the mark sheet on LinkedIn. If they just wrote, hey, I cleared CA, half of you won't look at it. Why? Because there's nothing to authenticate it. So why are we doing this? We are saying as a proof that we have done the internal audit. So that is why it becomes very important to have a written record of the entire audit. Objective, what is the objective? You support the audit procedures performed, evidence is obtained, and observation made. So tomorrow, you performing certain procedures, those could be substantial provision, those could be your control testing procedures, those could be your walkthroughs, those could be your flow charting. Anything you're doing needs to be documented. I will show you certain aspects in the future slides that how do you document the testing, how do you document your entire internal audit. But the idea is that whatever you're doing gets documented to authenticate the audit findings. Naturally, what happens out of this entire procedure of documentation is that once you complete an internal audit, there are findings. What is the output of my internal audit? That I have internal audit findings. Now, how do you authenticate the findings? So if you go to an audit committee, or if you go to a pre-audit committee, or you go to the CFO, hey, this is the 2 observations or the 4 observations of this. One is very critical, and the critical observation could be related to compliance, related to the impact on their financials, balance sheet, P&L. What is the first thing the CFO is going to ask? Can you show me your workings? Can you show me the instance? Can you show me even a photograph to prove it? Okay, you notice this non-compliance in the factory. Can you show me a photo? First thing they ask is, okay, show me. So what are you doing? You're authenticating your audit findings. There sometimes you go and tell the audit committee, or you go tell the CFOs or the C group, we did not get this data. We asked for it. We did not get it. So what is the first thing they say? Did you write a mail? Did you have a formal communication with the process owners? You say no. So what are they asking? They're again asking you to authenticate everything. And that's why this entire process of documenting the audit becomes very important. Again, to draw conclusions from the finding and observations. So one is I'm authenticating the audit findings, and the second part is I'm drawing a conclusion from the findings and the observations. And finally, I need to confirm that the work is performed in accordance with the ICI standards. And finally, when I do a proper documentation, it helps me with the SI 350, which is nothing but supervision and review of my audit. So if I have a good documentation around my entire internal audit, the review would be easier for any senior person who's looking at that entire process that has been carried out as part of internal audit. So what should the document contain? It should contain my internal audit plan. It should contain my internal audit charter. It should contain the engagement letter, audit procedures performed, audit evidence gathered, conclusion drawn by the audit. So these are all the documentation. Now again, this is recommendatory, or this is not an exhaustive list. I couldn't have much more things, but the idea is as long as you can document the entire audit, that's more than enough. These are jargons which are used, which is good. But audit of provision form, you say, no, I document the entire end-to-end walkthroughs. I document what are the risks, what are the controls, everything. Those are nothing but I'm performing those audit procedures. So the content becomes important. What is the requirements of audit documentation? So what is included? The document shall include the nature, extent, timing of completing, evidence collected, notes taken during activity. So as I said, what is my inclusion? Anything which is documented becomes an inclusion. You're testing an invoice, that becomes your documentation. You're documenting your testing scripts, that becomes a documentation. You're writing a mail to confirm the process you've understood, that becomes a documentation. You're preparing a flow chart to document the entire process, that becomes a documentation. So anything you do to do your audit or substantiate your audit becomes a documentation. Sufficiency. It should be sufficient to include all subject matter such as supporting for audit evidence, source of evidence, objective of procedures, audit observation, and auditor's conclusions. So the idea is just I have a document, but again, it should be sufficient in the end to ensure that whatever my conclusion is, it supports it. So my conclusion always does not mean that I always have a audit finding. My conclusion could be that there is no audit finding, but that does not mean that it shouldn't be documented. In fact, that requires more documentation because I'm saying there is no issue around this specific point. So if I say a simple example is procurement, one of the process manual says that we have built the logic in the ERP that my PO quantity cannot be more than the PR quantity. And that is one of the checks you've done to check whether the PO quantity can be more than the PR quantity. Now, how you evidence it becomes important. Either you first taken a PO dump and done an analysis and said, okay, hey, I have not found a single case where the PO quantity is more than the PR quantity. So my conclusion is that the system does not allow it. So we are fine with it. The second could be I actually go into the ERP and do a test check on the logic build. Now it naturally would be on the quality server. I could also use that as evidence because it's built into the system. I've verified the logic. I did a transaction test. I tried to create a PO which was more than the PR and it still didn't allow me to go through. So again, but when I have done this, I should have taken screenshots where it gives me the alert, you cannot create a PO more than the PR quantity. So all that needs to be documented. Sometimes what we do is we look at things and we come back without actually documenting them. And tomorrow, when you're sitting in front of the CFO says, no, I don't agree with you. I think my system can allow a PO more than the PR. I saw one case. And you will say, no, we saw it, it does not allow. The first thing would be, okay, can you show me how you verified this? And if that time you don't have these workings or you don't have these screenshots from the system, then the first impression which goes is that you've actually not done the audit. Then they're not questioning anything. They're saying you've not actually done the audit. So that is why it becomes very important to document it. Third part is filing and timely completion. So audit work papers should be arranged in files. So this is as simple as being very correct and methodical with regards to filing your work papers. They could be in soft copies, they could be in actual hard copy files. But the idea is how do you number them? How do you link them to your working paper? That should be important. And ownership and retention. Naturally, the working papers is the ownership of the internal auditor, and they have to be retained for a certain period of time to ensure, we have all the backups to show that this audit was conducted as per the required standards. What is the form and content of the audit documentation? So nature is, it can be, as I said, maintained in paper or electronic mode or any other medium. The documents must be standardized in form of checklist, questionnaires, letters. So as I said, it is up to you. You want to have a checklist, you need to have a questionnaire, you want to have a risk and control matrix. However you want to do it, plus please document the entire end-to-end audit. Understanding, the document should provide an overall understanding of the audit. So again, as I said, it's an end-to-end documentation of the audit, and someone who's reviewing it, looking at your documentation should be able to provide, he or she should be able to understand what happened in the audit. Fourth, it is not a substitute to entities' accounting records. It's not a substitute for that. The entity will maintain the record separately. So it's not a substitute. And finally, collation, it has to be collated in a file in form of working papers. Now I think I'll jump into the main part, which is the practical illustration and how the working paper should ideally be carried out. So I'm going to take an example, let's say we got an audit with a XYZ company. The first thing, what do we do? We've thrashed out the commercials, we've thrashed out all the requirements. And what is the first thing we do? We first propose a scope and a quarterly plan. If it's a quarterly audit, if it's a half-yearly audit, if it's a yearly audit, depends. But out here, I'm taking a quarterly. That I'm going to cover these things Yeah. So HR, payroll, information technology in Q1, plant operations in Q2, finance and accounts in Q3, sales and marketing in Q4. And I give a indicative, very high level sub processes what I'm going to cover. And what I'm going to cover in, so what I've covered in 21-22 and what I'm planning to cover in 2020. This is ideally put up to the audit committee in case of a listed company where it gets approved. Yes, this is what your scope and the plan for the entire year would look like. So that creates your first documentation, because the first thing anyone will ask is, who asked you to do it? You can't just say, okay, I did the HR payroll audit and here are my working papers. If someone wants to look at your entire audit for the year, the first question would be, basis what this scope was finalized. So naturally, this scope was finalized with the discussion with the senior management, the respective process people, as we say, gathering the audit universe. And in the end, the scope was approved by the audit committee. We are assuming this is a listed company, so it was approved by the audit committee. So fine, great. So they agreed that you would cover these certain things quarter-wise. So yes, these are the things which needs to be covered and got finalized. So after that, we finalize. Now we issue an audit engagement letter, because this, what you have agreed, needs to be documented in form of a, you call it a letter of engagement or audit engagement letter. So naturally you issue it. I'm not going to get too much into it because every firm or every organization might have different content. But the idea is document the scope of services, document what are the expectations, document what are the deliverables, that it's going to be an audit report. Audit report will contain what all, what are my timelines, what is the team, fees, everything. And kind of an audit engagement letter is developed based on these, which is then sent for sign. Now we've come to Q1. So the Q1 audit needs to start now. As I said, we divided the plan into the quarterly basis. So the Q1 plan needs to start. So what do we do? First, we prepare the audit plan. Before the initiation of any audit, we need to plan it, because this is the planning which will also help me supervise the audit. If I am the senior on the job, this is the planning which also helps me supervise. So naturally, when you create an audit plan, again, formats could be different. Way of presenting it could be different. But again, the content is what is more important. So first I say, what is the client? What is the audit period? When I'm planning to commence the audit? More importantly, who is the coordinator from the client side? What is the audit team going to be? Who's going to be the team leader? Who's going to be the team members? What is the scope for the period? Am I going to do a lot of substantive checking in this? What have I planned? Total days planned is 13 days. But if I'm, let's say, putting 4 people, so normally my man days would be days planned into the number of people. Now this is 52 days of man days. And then the second part is the program. What is the scope of work? So I'm going to cover procure to pay, expense, inventory, legal compliance. I'm going to do an entire process review. I'm going to do a substantive checking, of which I'm going to pick up samples. What are the dates I'm going to cover these areas from? So I've got 4 team members. So naturally each of them can start on a particular date and close out on a particular date. Now let's say if I had only 2 members going there. So I will say, okay, first I'm going to cover procure to pay, expense to review. Once these 2 areas finish, I will cover the 3 and 4. So it depends on the amount of people you have, amount of workforce you have to cover these audits. So this gives me the audit plan. Okay, I'm covering on 23rd. By 8th, I'm planning to finish my field work. Then from the field work, I will have a discussion with the points. I will have my report discussions. I will get management action plan and I sent out the final report. So I've documented my audit plan. Now I'm further dividing the audit plan into the audit schedule. And I would suggest this has really helped me a lot of time, where as part of, so whenever we have any internal audit starting, we have an opening meeting. As part of this, we show them an audit schedule. We're saying, okay, when are we having the opening meeting as of date? Now we are sending you the information request, which is important. Then what is the timeline we are giving you to give that information? So let's say if I'm sending the information request on first, I'm saying I'm going to give you 5 days to give me the information. And every time we say who's the team involved and what is the mode. Now this mode has become important during the COVID time where we could not travel to the client's places. So they said, okay, we will either give it to you in email or via Microsoft Teams, which we provide a link and the client can upload their data there. And the team involved, who's accountable for what or who's responsible for what. So sending the information request, naturally it is the audit team's accountability responsibility, but providing it is naturally the client's responsibility. So the team members come. Then what you say, these are the dates I'm going to do the process understanding and walkthrough. I'm going to do the analysis of the data provided. I'm going to send a clarification queries on the data provided. Once all this is done, I'll share my samples for testing. You need to provide me the documents related to samples. I test the samples. Post that, I share the draft report to discuss with the process owners. Post which we get the management comments. So this is helping you to do things. And again, I will link back everything to supervision and review, because working papers and supervision review are very interconnected. So one is, naturally it'll help me review or supervise the progress of the entire audit. As a senior, I would say, okay, these were the dates involved. Now, when I get a update or a progress, people will actually put the actual dates against this and say, yes, this is where we are. Secondly, it also puts a good roadmap to the client. Okay, these are all the activities that are going to happen. This is when it's going to happen. Now, let's say some of this is towards the month end. So the client can tell us there and then, hey, for the finance and accounts, can you please pick that up quickly? Because during my month end, finance and accounts get a little busy. My HR payroll gets busy in payroll. So please, could you pick that up and provide the samples earlier? And for the remaining two, that's fine. We are okay with month end. So all this talking happens and helps you come up with a firm schedule, which helps you then be on, the timeline is adhered to. So that becomes very important. Now I'm coming to the documentation of the audit procedure. So what we've done, we finalized the audit of a company. We finalized the engagement letter. We've now started Q1. We started Q1, then we finalized the audit plan amongst ourselves. Then once the audit plan was finalized, we had a discussion with the client, an opening meeting, where we said, this is how we're going to go ahead with the entire audit in Q1. Now the audit is started, and I need to document my entire audit procedures. So so again, I'll always put this disclaimer. This is something I have been doing. This is something which has helped me. There might be 50 people on this call, 40 people on this call. All 40 might have different ways of doing things, completely acceptable. But please understand, what is my target? What is the end result? End result is you need to document the audit. You may have different terminologies. You may have different ways of, capturing things. But again, what is the end? That my audit gets captured, and it is a document which can be reviewed in an easy manner. So what do I do when I document the following? First is identify the potential risk areas in scope of work. I analyze the document verification to be conducted, verify against the risk areas and find. Then I test perform on the documents verified. So if you look at the below table, I've just taken a preventive maintenance example and a sub-scope. So in this, what I'm saying is I'm just looking. So operation and maintenance is the major scope. One of the areas I need to cover in that is the preventive maintenance schedule, or as we say, compliance to the operation and maintenance plan. Now, what is the risk? I've identified the risk that if these schedules are not met, I may have a breakdown. Because if I'm not doing the maintenance, what is the first thing happens? I have a risk of the machine being breakdown. I may have a lot of production hours lost. So this is the risk we identify. Then the second thing we do is we document the existing process. Okay, what is the process the organization has to mitigate these risks? So they're saying that they prepare an annual maintenance plan, which is prepared by the technical evaluation team. Then they're sent to the respective units. The deputy manager updates the plan on the quarterly basis. The O&M department prepares planned versus actual sheet. So this is the process. Now in this process, what are the controls? So the control is first the annual maintenance plan is approved by the GA head. The plan is quarterly is also approved by the head. There's a review which happens of plan versus actual maintenance, and approval of operation head is obtained for any deviation in the plan. So we've identified the controls. Now I believe as part of any audit procedures, these two things are one of the most critical aspects. Because first is, if you've not understood the process, then you'll not be able to document this. And if you've not understood the process, then you certainly don't know about the controls. And that is where your walkthroughs help. So yes, so if you're doing this or the audit for the second, third time, you might have this document, but it is always important to re-verify the process and controls. There might be a case where I did an audit this year and I do the audit next year. The client has come up with a new ERP. So my process and controls would have changed. And if I go and start asking data or I start asking questions based on this process, the client will say, okay, you've not even understood my process. So you've not even taken the pain of understanding if there have been any changes to my process. Now, let's say this was a new client. We don't know, we don't have any documentation regards to them apart from an SOP. Okay. So now we are documenting these exercises, process and controls. So what it helps you in doing is that when you're documenting these things, it will help you identify design gaps, whether you think the process has been designed correctly. That is the most important part. And the second part is that when you document these controls, then you see, okay, you know, this control is not making sense, or this control, I know how they do it. So when you're looking at these controls, please don't document any control which cannot be tested. As I said, if it's not documented, the audit is not done. In the same way, if it's not documented, it's not a control. You know, as I say to everyone in my team, you know, in God we trust, rest we audit. So it's important that whatever you document, so if you could document a control out here that, you know, let's take the fourth one, approval of operation head is obtained from any deviation from AOM. You've documented this control because this is the control that was told to you. Now, if you've not done a proper walkthrough of this entire process, when you go to do your testing, someone will tell you, oh, this approval just happens informally, or we just call him and take the approval. But is that an ideal documented control? No. So if we've done a proper walkthrough of this entire process and understood this process and controls, we would have been able to identify this control actually does not exist. So we're not going to document it, or will not be able to do it. Now, if I come to the fifth column, it says data analytics. Now out here put not applicable because maybe I could not get reports which help me data analytics. So for 1 second, let's say this was not an operation and maintenance scope. This is a payroll area which we're doing. Now in payroll, we could do a lot of analysis. I could do a month-on-month variance analysis. So all it helps me is that I'm documenting what are the data analytics I've done, and I can then link those data analytics out here. So if someone clicks, they can go to those data analytics procedures. Now I'm going to document what is the testing procedure I'm going to carry out. So what is the testing I'm going to carry out? I'm going to say verification of annual and updated plan. I'm going to also check the monitoring which has been done for budget versus actual, and the approval has been taken. And what is the testing I've conducted? I've looked at the approval of the GA head. I've looked at the planned versus actual. And where have I tested? I have tested. There's a testing script for the same. So if someone clicks on it, they basically come out here. So what I did, I mentioned the process, I mentioned the risk. So it links back to my previous working papers. I mentioned the control description out here. My apologies, this control is not line in what is mentioned there, but this is here. This is what the controls should be mentioned out here. And below is all the samples that I have taken for tested. So I looked at, for the month of April, I looked at this contractor, I looked at this amount, and I saw that ABCD controls, which are nothing but 1, 2, 3 above. they are there or not. So if let's say somewhere it says no, so basically that control is failing in those cases. So that is how you document your entire procedure. Now this is just for one subscope. I might have 15 subscopes in a entire scope of work for one particular area. This is just for one subscope. So let's say if I was doing it for HR payroll, I would have this starting from manpower planning to recruitment to payroll processing, payment, accounting, leave management, attendance management, training management, payment of the statutory compliances, dues, their performance appraisal. So each of these, I would have to build these entire document where I would have the risk identified, I would have the existing process identified, the controls, what are the analysis I've carried out, testing procedure, testing conducted, and where is that testing testing script documented. And naturally, behind this entire testing are my actual documents, which again needs to be documented for the purpose of showing it to someone. Now, there are two thoughts to it. I've looked at, let's say, 50 actual documents. Now, one question could be, do I need to store all 50 documents, or do I pick up 5 documents? So the way I work is that if all 50 are clear, please store one document, because during review, I would like to see what all controls you've looked at in that document. Let's say out of those 50 documents, 15 controls are failing. So please, wherever the controls fail, all those documents should be documented. So let's say if you get a complete clear testing, you get no issues in any of the documents. My advice is keep one. If you want to keep all 50, no one stops you. But again, it depends upon internally what your supervisor is asking for. Now, of all these entire procedures, testing, naturally, what is the result? I could have probable observations. The probable I'm seeing is because, again, the next step after doing the procedures would be, we discuss the probable observations with the process owners. So that can also be documented. Like in this case, for a manpower acquisition form, what was my checkpoint? A certain timely closure of manpower vacancy. I had an observation that the manpower requirement was not closed by the HR team within the turnaround time prescribed. And then I have an annexure to show them all the cases where such things have happened. So I document this and I send them for discussion. This also helps you, because at times we've noted, right, in internal audit, when that final discussion is happening with senior management or department heads, someone from the other side would say, hey, I was not told about this observation. I was never made aware about this. These things were not discussed with me. And then the entire discussion of the report goes on a different tangent. Then we're not discussing the report, then we're discussing what was sent, what was not sent. So all this, again, when you send these probable observations, you're documenting the fact that anything which has come into my final report is a derivative of this, and this was discussed with you and sent. So again, that helps you document this entire observations part. And again, I've just given a reference that, okay, if you have an annexure 1, this is the annexure 1, how you document all your instances where the failures have happened. So this is on the entire documentation. Before I move into the supervision and the other piece, I would be happy to take questions on documentation, because I've said documentation, we need to do documentation. Why we need to documentation has been explained. How we need to do is been explained. Now, as I said, how the formats could be different, but there is a process through which this documentation should happen. Now, as I said in the beginning, with regards to your finalization, that's going to only happen once. But when you go into your quarterly audits or your half-yearly audits, your point of start should be from the audit plan. And from audit plan to having an opening meeting, discussing all my, how I'm going to carry out the activities, to documenting all the audit procedures in the form of a risk and control matrix, questionnaires, whatever you want to call it, to documenting a probable observation for discussion, that should take place for every area covering. So if there are any questions till now, I'm happy to answer with regards to documentation. Anyone wants to have a question? Great. So now no questions. I'll move on to the next. I hope I'm not boring you. I know it's a Friday evening, but let's move on to review of supervision of internal audit. So, the internal audit has started. The team is doing well. The team is documented all the audit procedures. You know, this is a rhetorical question, but sometimes it happens. The audit is over, and suddenly the manager or the director on the audit says, "You didn't see this. Why this issue is not coming? Why haven't you looked at all?" And you look him up in disbelief, saying, I've just spent 30 days out here or 15 days out here doing an end-to-end audit, documenting all the procedures which is required of me. And at the end, you're saying you've not looked at this, you've not looked at that. Now, that wouldn't have happened if the manager or the director had followed this concept of review and supervision. So next time someone says this at the end of the audit, please don't take it upon yourself. The person is not followed SI 350. Again, this becomes a very important aspect of the internal audit, review and supervision. Now, people may ask, what is the difference between review and supervision? I'll tell you very in simple things. A supervision is nothing but monitoring the progress of the audit. So as I said in the beginning, we had these dates that when will I send the idea, when will I get the information, when will I do the walkthroughs. Is that happening on time? Are there any challenges there? Are there any roadblocks which needs to be highlighted to the senior management department heads? That falls under supervision. Review is when the person comes in and reviews your working papers, reviews what you've covered, gives you inputs that these are the additions which you can further look at. That's called review. Again, the periodicity of the review is dependent on everyone. That is not defined anywhere. As per thing, if I did the review only one time during the audit, might be fine, might not be fine. But again, you need to decide how many times you need to review. That will always depend on the complexity, the criticality of the audit, the nature of the audit, naturally the size of the client. It will all depend on that. I have a simple, a mantra is that I review any assignment which is going, and I minimum look at it twice a week. One review is quite in detail, which could go on for 1 hour, 2 hours, where I look at the audit working papers. And one call is more on the supervision side, where I talk to the team that are they facing any challenges with regards to the work? Are they facing any challenges with regards to the data? Are they facing any other challenges? So I could speak to my counterpart and the client and get that sorted out. So that's my thing. And naturally, in addition to these reviews comes the review of your audit reports, review of your audit committee presentations. So that all gets reviewed. But don't get too much bogged down with the jargon. Supervision is where you're supervising the progress of the audit, and the review is where you're looking at the working papers and giving your inputs as seniors on the job. So just look at it from that perspective. Meaning, nature, and scope. So as I said, the extent of review and supervision is not same for all audit assignments. It varies from audit to audit, depending upon various factors like objective, scope, complexity, staff availability. However, the review shall cover all the activities as already discussed: audit planning, sampling, procedures, evidence. As I said, this is what the review covers. They will look at everything at every step to ensure it is in line with the standard, to ensure it is in line with what the client is expecting, and to ensure, if I may use the word, there's no negligence happening. And finally, review of working papers shall be done by a person who's at least one level above the person who prepared them, to ensure it. Naturally, when we go and do an audit, we said who reviewed it, and if the person said, the person sitting next to me reviewed it, we will make it an audit observation. Oh, the person at the same level is reviewing, so how can that be possible? In the same way, when our audit happens and the review happens, it ideally should be at one level higher than the person. So if, let's say, you're a team leader, and again, it depends on how the hierarchy works in your organization. If you're a team leader, the manager is reviewing it. If the manager is doing the audit, the senior manager, associate directors reviewing it. Now, review could have also have two levels of review. I could have for a large client where the first level of review is happening at a, let's say, senior manager level, and the second level of review is happening at a partner level. So you're going to have n level of reviews, but the idea is one needs to review what is happening. So what is the objective of review? So as I said, it validates the audit plan. Its review is necessary to validate the audit plan, the audit procedures. It verifies the procedures and evidence. As I said, people can look at it whether what you're doing is correct, whether the evidence you're collecting is correct. Audit documentation, again, what is this? So a review is a subset of the entire documentation. Anyone who comes and looks at your working papers, of course, after looking and say, okay, now who reviewed these working papers? So you're going to say, okay, XYZ, my manager, my director, my partner reviewed these papers. So they also, the review itself becomes a part of the audit documentation. Naturally, it's a compliance to the standards issued by the ICI and audit report. So if a review is done correctly, the conclusions in the audit report, the discussion with the management would be much smoother. And if the supervision is done correctly, naturally, it helps me achieve the timeline which I wanted to achieve when I prepared the audit timeline. I may not go overboard with my staffing requirements. So again, it's in tandem, review and supervision. But in the end, the end objective is I get a good report out and I get a timely report out. What are the requirements of review and supervision of an audit? So first is review of audit evidence documentation. So again, it's a repetition, I know, but we need to look at it. You will look at the extent, timing of all the activities, procedures must be reviewed and supervised by the engagement partner. So all evidence is out to. I review the audit working papers, which I have told you. Periodicity and extent of review, we have discussed this, and it's a conformity to the standards. Now coming to the illustration parts, there are two parts to it. Now this is the supervision. Okay, so I want to understand whether the audit which has started is happening, is on task. So what I've done, so let's say I'm going to cover procure to pay. There are 3 locations I'm covering it. So what I've done under procure to pay, I've created all the sub processes that are need to be covered. And then I ask, okay, send me an update. So all the greens means those areas have got completed in each location. Audit execution is in process for some of them. Red is where I highlight, okay, data not received. And then what is the action that I've escalated it to the HOD. And in some cases, I've not even commenced the audit because the process discussion is pending. So this is something which helps you monitor the progress of the entire audit. And then when you have a discussion with the manager or the TL on the job, you can, kind of have a discussion. Now, the first question I would ask is, okay, you've escalated to the HOD. Has there been any response from the HOD? And the person says, no, there's been no response. So what I would do is I'll either pick up a phone and call up the internal audit head, or I'll call up the CFO that, we're facing challenges with these cases. Or the other person might say, yes, it got escalated yesterday, and we've been ensured that the data would come in the next 2 days. If it does not come, I would ask you to escalate the same. But what is this helping me? This is helping me giving a bird's eye view where my audit stands. If I look at this, this is ideally a progress of the first week. Okay, because a lot of areas which are in process, there are some areas which have not started, in some cases have not released the data. And this is the kind of progress we have. And this also is helpful in having a discussion with the client. A lot of times we have this weekly update calls with the client that they also want to know where the audit is there any roadblocks. Not only does this help you in monitor the progress, this also helps to show the client, this is what it looks like. And when the client looks at it location wise, area wise, what is happening, they're more than happy. Okay, if some client looked at this, let's say this was the 4th week of the audit and the client looked at this, they would be startled to see, there's hardly anything happened. So what have we been doing for the 4 weeks? So ideally, that's why you do it on a weekly basis to ensure such things don't happen. Now coming to the review. So that was on the progress, now review. So we picked up an area called procure to pay. I've given a very high level flow that there's a master creation, there's a PR creation, quotation comparison, quality check, purchase order, GRN, quality check, invoice booking, and payment to vendor. This is what a high level P2P would look like. Now, when I went and reviewed, with the team, the first thing is, have you obtained or downloaded the data which is required? If it's a SAP or an Oracle, have you got all the data? Have you documented your entire understanding of the system? And have you done the walkthrough? So I'll go through those entire walkthrough sheets and I will have further questions. Have you looked at this in SAP? So if someone said, I did a walkthrough of the SAP, I went into the PO, I did some test checking in the quality server. I found out that the payment terms could be changed during creation of a PO. So my next question would be, did you also check whether I could change the price? Sorry, not the price, but could I change the vendor name also? Let's say if that SAP is a gap. So you have certain questions coming from some of the gaps which have been already designed. Then you review the data analysis conducted on the data accuracy of the data. So let's say if this was not procurement, this was inventory. So what is the first thing you will look before even looking at a data analysis? That please can you tell me whether the inventory data which they have given you matches with their financials or not? Because if your data is not matching with your financials, that data cannot be relied upon. So always ensure as part of your review that all the data the team is getting, there is a way to substantiate that data. Then if there are any exceptions noted during the data analytics, do we have justifications? Do we have reasons? Then what are samples you've picked? How many samples you've picked? What are the documents you're looking at? And if there are any potential observations, the discussion around potential observation is also important, because sometimes the team is doing so much, they might just write the observation, okay, this is it, but may not have gone to the actual root cause. And when you as the senior start questioning, you might understand that this observation may have implication on 2 other or 3 other areas. It might have an impact on GST, it might have an impact on inventory valuation. So it is very important that when you're discussing these observations, you ask for root causing from your team, or you help them achieve that root causing, because that becomes the basis of preparing the report and telling the client that this observation this issue happens because of these 3 factors or these 2 factors. So what we've done, we went, there's a procure to pay happening, and we've reviewed the entire work which is conducted by the team. Then once this review is done, the other thing is you need to sit and ask, do they have any clarification? Do they have any requirement or anything? And then it's another way around where they might ask you questions. Okay, this is the 10 more things we would like to do. How would you suggest we go through this? Now, whatever you've reviewed, please ensure you've reviewed the actual documents. These are not plain discussions. That something like, someone sitting in front of me, how many samples did you check? Oh, sir, I checked 50. Okay, you checked 50. Thank you very much. But have we looked at those 50 samples? Have we seen what all they've tested against that? Then you don't want to be embarrassed of the client when the client says, I think what you're saying is incorrect, and you tell the person, please show them the testing. The person says, no, I've not documented anything. Then again, you go back to that same thing, that your audit is not complete or you've not done a good audit. So that's where documentation becomes very important. There's another thing which, I was asked to do is, this Institute of Internal Auditors has a standard called 2500 monitoring progress. If you read this, this is not the same as supervision and review. This monitoring progress is more of a follow-up process of the audit observations which have already been reported. And you do a follow-up, and then you give a kind of an update to the client or the chief executive, audit executive, that this is where the organization stands. So don't mix it up with the monitoring part of the previous SI 350. That is monitoring the audit progress. This is monitoring the progress of the observations which have been reported in previous audit reports. As they say, consideration for implementation. I'm just going to read this out, then I'll tell you something. Monitoring processes can be sophisticated or rather simple depending on number of factors, including the size and complexity of the audit organization and availability of exception tracking software. Whether sophisticated or simple, it is important for the CA to develop a process that captures the relevant observations, agreed corrective action, and current status. For outstanding observations, the information tracked and captured typically includes the observations communicated to management and their relative risk rating, the nature of the agreed corrective actions, the timeline, deadlines, the management process owner responsible, the current status of corrective actions. So if someone read this, this is not actually monitoring the progress of the audit, this is monitoring the progress of the observations which were reported. And believe me, in today's world, what I have seen in the last couple of years during my internal audit, where from the time I have started going to the audit committees or meeting senior people, there's a very big interest in these previous observations which have been noted. There are 2-3 reasons for that. One is the audit committee or the management want to understand how sincere or how serious the process owners are with regards to what they said they will do. Secondly, is it an integrity issue where a person says he will do it in the next 2 months, but again changes the timeline, again changes the timeline? So is it becoming an integrity issue or is there some other issue? Third is they also want to understand whether this requires some kind of investment. Do they need to change their systems? If something is not being able to get implemented, that means there's some other issue. From an internal audit perspective, it is all the more important for you to do this because firstly, this shows to you whether the recommendations you're giving, are they practical or not? Sometimes what we do is we give a recommendation of a 10,000 crore company to a 100 crore company. And then we say, oh, you can do this, you can take this system, you can build this. No, we need to give recommendations which are practical and easy to implement. And that is the reason they'll never implement it and it'll keep on going on that, we look at it. So it also gives you a heads up whether what you recommending are doing it correctly or not. And secondly, it also gives you that, okay, if people are implementing what you've said, then you're actually adding value to the organization, because if all your recommendations are getting implemented in time, that means the management, the process owners, the head of departments actually see a value in what you've told them to do. So this is actually a very important. I believe that in an internal audit, 60-70% is the audit you do and 30% is the follow-up. I'm not talking about from a perspective of the time spent, I'm talking about from a value add. In a lot of audit committees, I've been told, Abhishek, please do not jump right into the observation. First, tell us what is the progress on the previous audit observation. We want to first understand that. And believe me, there have been process owners which have been called in middle of audit committees to explain why they could not do it. So this becomes a very important aspect. This is just telling you, again, giving you a format how you can show it. Like, as I said, you could have what are the total observations which have been, reported, how many got implemented, what are the work in progress, what are overdue for implementation, what are not due for implementation. So the simple explanation for this is, so if someone gave a timeline for 31st March, and we're presenting, let's say, this report audit committee in April, and it's still not implemented, that means it became overdue for implementation. And someone gave a timeline for 31st May, and we're presenting it in April, naturally it is not due for implementation. Though it's always a good idea to talk to that process owner and say, hey, your implementation date is coming in the next 1 month. Can you just give me what is the heads up on that? And then below, you can always, for the ease of the management, say, okay, the ones which are not the ones which are overdue for implementation, how many of them fall under the high risk category, how many are under medium risk, how many are low risk. So what again this helps to do is that the audit committee or the senior management first pick up the high one, which are these high ones which have not got implemented because you're still sitting on that risk. So helps them focus on those specific areas. And again, this kind of just gives us, how you present it, what was the observation, what is the progress which has been made in the current quarter, who's the process owner, what was the original timeline that's given. what is the updated timeline? So this person has changed his timeline from October 2021 to December to 2022. Now, this is something which the audit committee will pounce on. What is happening? Are you not able to do it? You don't want to do it? We want to understand the exact reasons for this. So that is how it helps them do it. Now, there are certain tools also to manage this. We have a tool where it is more of an automation, where I can actually feed in the observations into the system, and I configure the email IDs of these process owners, and we build a escalation template. So what will happen is, let's say, give an example, let's say someone had to implement an XYZ area by 30th of June. We configure the tool that on 1st of June, there'll be a reminder going to them, hey, 30th June is approaching. You had agreed that you will implement A, B, C. So this is a reminder. Now, if they've not actioned upon it, the reminder will go again on 10th, then it'll go on 15th. Then on 20th or 25th, the reminder will go with an escalation to his immediate boss. We just have 5 days. There's no action happened on this. Now, if there's no response to this, if the 30th passes, the escalation can happen up to the MD level. So there's an escalation matrix built. Now, let's say if the person is sincere, what he or she would do is they would log into this tool. They would say, yes, we've implemented it. And they would attach a document as an evidence to show how they've implemented it. What is that evidence? Someone from my team will review it and then close the observation saying this is implemented. Otherwise, the other thing would the person will log in, say, no, I'm extending the timeline which I had given, and this is the reason. And if we find that reason is valid, we allow them to extend the timeline. But in the end, what this tool helps me? I generate a report before the audit committee and I put it in the PPT saying, these are all the observations. This is how many have got closed. This is how many are open. This is how many the timelines have got extended. So it kind of helps me. So as they said, you could have a tool, you could do it manually through Excel sheet. It all depends upon the teams, but this is a very important aspect of the entire internal audit. So yeah, so that was from me. Any questions, I'm happy to answer. Okay, so I see some questions here. Okay, okay. Thank you.
Indeed, a very nice session, sir. The PPT was very nice. And I think we all participants would have enjoyed the illustrations, specifically the formats which you have shared. And hereby I give you a formal vote of thanks on behalf of everyone. Thank you for such a interesting session. Sometimes question not asked can actually be taken as that the topic was very nice, very well understood, though the topic was very simple.
Right.
But when you practically go for implementation of audit documentation and audit supervision and review, you need the tips which you have given handy, especially the formats, which, the practical examples in the format made us understand what should be the benchmark for the documentation and how supervision and review should be considered. So thank you for sparing this Friday evening for enlightening us. Thank you for a wonderful session, sir.
Thank you. And as I say, sometimes the simple things are what makes your life difficult. So
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. On behalf of WIRC, Internal Audit Committee. Thank you, sir. Thank you all the participants for being there in the session and attending it with your, lovely hearts. And I hope the presentation was clear, and we look forward to have you again, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.